Establishing teacher-student relationships in the classroom is probably one of the easiest things, or it could be one of the hardest things that you face as an educator. So if you clicked on this video, you're probably either a student teacher or a veteran teacher trying to establish good relationships with your kids. So some of you, you're natural at it. You go into the classroom and you're like, yeah, I can establish relationships with the kids. I get along with them. I like them. They like me, and it's great. Where some of you, this could be a little bit of a struggle. It can be difficult to make that connection with those kids, whether it's you don't have the same interests, maybe they hate your class, maybe they've heard rumors about you, maybe they're not sure about you yet. It's very difficult to create that relationship. So this video is going to go over 5 tips on how to establish relationships with your students within your classroom. Before we jump into this video, make sure you hit that like and subscribe button. Let's get to it. Tip number 1 is showing that you care and communication. You want to show that you actually care for these students. Obviously, you're going to get some students that you are not going to like. You're going to get really irritated when they show up. Those are the kids who always show up and they're never sick. Yeah, there's going to be kids like that, but you need to show your students that you care about them. You care about their well-being. Yes, after they graduate, they kind of go to the back of your mind. You don't think about them anymore. But when they're in your classroom, you need to show them that you care about them, that you are happy to have them there. So when they walk into the classroom, say hi to them, ask them how their day's going. Even the really quiet people, lots of times they come in, they don't say a single thing. And then by the end of the year, if you establish a good relationship with them, it turns out that they really liked you, that you were one of their favorite teachers. So make sure you show the students that you care. And communication is a big thing. So first, when it comes to communication for the classroom, curriculum. So make sure you're always communicating, showing that you care by communicating with them. If they send you an email, be respectful, be prompt about it, send that email to them. And that kind of shows they're like, yeah, this guy, this girl is engaged in my learning, in my education. And so that kind of helps build a relationship right there. And even when it comes to the classroom, just that communication, showing that you care about them and that you're interested in all of their different activities that they're involved in, the interests outside of school. So showing that you care and having consistent communication all are like the building blocks of establishing good, strong relationships between the teacher and the students in a classroom. Tip number 2 is creating a welcoming, inclusive classroom environment. So there are many different ways you can establish this classroom environment, whether it's just what you see, maybe visually, your classroom is set up to be kind of welcoming. My classroom is a little bit different than a lot of the other classrooms at the school that I teach at. I don't have my lights on. I have lamps in my room. I have a wax melt in the corner that gives it kind of a different smell. So it just kind of has a different atmosphere. So when students walk in, or even when they walk by, they see that, okay, Mr. Davis's classroom, it's a little different. Some people like it, some people hate it. I have students who come in and are like, oh, this is really cool. And I got other students who are like, man, this is weird. Like, this is a school. Why has he got his classroom like this? But that kind of sparks that interest, sparks potentially that establishing of a relationship there. It was a little fuzzy that just went by. Did anybody see that? Having a welcoming environment for your classroom is key to establishing those relationships from the get-go. So like I said, even the visualizations help, but where I see a huge jump in student to teacher relationships in the classroom is how you begin your class. So there's all kinds of theories on how you should start a lesson. In college, when you were becoming a teacher, I'm sure they talked about bell ringers, having that question of the day in the front, related to your history lesson or your math lesson or something like that. For me, I like to I like to switch it up a little bit. I got this idea from one of my cooperating teachers during student teaching. She would always have a question of the day on the wall. It could be connected to what we were talking about, but it could also be just a random question. So I took that and I used that for the first couple of minutes of my class period. So when the students come in, they all sit down and the bell rings. I come in and then we start out with the question of the day. So that question could be, what is your favorite kind of candy? Is it pop or soda? What's the proper name for it? If you could meet one person in history, who would that person be? What's your favorite kind of music? So this seems like, just kind of a random thing. Lots of teachers scoff at it. They're just like, yeah, it's just kind of a random thing that you do. Yeah, it's Mr. Davis's thing. Some people think it's a waste of time. I have found that it makes the students a little bit more comfortable being in my class. Lots of kids who are very quiet, this is their times where they can actually contribute a little bit more. Because, remember back when you were a student, it was never fun being called out by the teacher during math class just because of a math problem. What's XYZ divided by WLAI or whatever it is, and it got picked on and you're like, I don't know, I don't want to speak ever again in this class. Where if you set up your classroom, you start your class with a simple question that can be answered, lots of times the student engagement goes up and they begin to trust that teacher a little bit more. Just having a simple, fun question, what's your favorite movie that just came out? Maybe it's Avengers, maybe it's Star Wars, whatever it is. That student who's usually quiet knows an answer, they can contribute, and then they're good. They start to feel a little bit more comfortable in that classroom. So how you start your lesson is very important to establishing those relationships. So you can do that. There's all kinds of things. You can do a little game. You can do that bell ringer, that question that's related to your content, or just asking simple questions. And even to the point of just asking, how's everybody's day going? Just sparking a little conversation. There are lots of teachers who do that, where they're just like, hey, how's everybody's day going? Oh, it's not going so well? All right, let's talk it out real quick. Let's take a few minutes. Everybody stop what you're doing. Let's just talk it out. What's going on around the school? Why is everybody having a minute day? So find that connection, find that activity, that idea that really helps you start connecting with your students. Tip number 3 on how to better establish a teacher-student relationship in the classroom is giving positive reinforcement. So positive reinforcement is a big thing in my teaching career. When I learned about it in college, I was just kind of like, okay, yeah, that's a cool theory, and I didn't really think much about it. But then I got to see it in action when I got into the classroom, and even in other jobs that I was working throughout college. In one of my jobs, there was a guy who was working there who had a kind of a rough background, didn't have a whole lot of support from home, and he would do the job, he would work, and lots of times he would get crap from other workers just because he didn't do a great job. And so I wanted to test this theory out one day, this positive reinforcement, giving that positive feedback to that person to see if they improve. And so I told this coworker that it was like, hey, yeah, you did a nice job on that project. That looks really good. Nice job. That person almost broke down. It was the weirdest thing. Like, they just looked at me and just were so grateful that I recognized their work, that I complimented them on their achievements. And so that's when I was really thinking, like, you know what? I really need to use this in my classroom. I thought it was just kind of a weird theory, but this is a big thing. Even if a student gets an answer wrong, providing some kind of positive reinforcement is huge when it comes to establishing those strong relationships between the teacher and the student. Tip number 4 is to be fair, be consistent, and have clear expectations in your classroom. So in my experiences as being a teacher, I usually the teacher that a lot of students come to rant about other teachers, which, I sit there and listen. I don't engage in it, but I sit there and listen. And a lot of the feedback that I get from a lot of students is the inconsistency of some teachers. I take a lot of things with a grain of salt when it comes from students, because they're in bad moods, they just want to get at the teacher, so I just listen. And a lot of students are just saying, yeah, they're not consistent with this, not consistent with that. They said it was due this day, but actually it was due this day. Whether that's true, I don't know. I usually don't look too deep into it, but it is kind of a reminder for myself when I have expectations in my classroom, I need to be sure that I am consistent. When the students see that you are a fair teacher, that you are reasonable, that you listen to them, say that this person didn't turn in an assignment the other night, they come to you and they have an excuse. That's up to you. You are the professional. You get to decide whether that's a true excuse or if it was a fake excuse, if they're just trying to, work the system a little bit. But showing that you're willing to listen and try to understand the situation, be fair. I'm not saying give them the grade, give them extension, but being willing to listen to them and actually understand what's going on in the situation, showing that you are a listener, that you're not just going to take their paper and throw it away, that is going to help establish that relationship with that student. Having that fairness, having that consistency, and just overall just that clarity between the teacher and the student when it comes to how the class works, and even that relationship between you and that student. So again, be fair, be consistent, and have clear expectations. That will help build a lot of the relationships in your classroom. The final tip to build strong relationships between the teacher and the student in your classroom is to make sure that you have an engaging environment. Keep the students engaged in whatever you're doing in the classroom, whether that's with the lesson, whether that's just with the discussion. Keep the kids engaged. One thing that I always like to share with other teachers when it comes to trying to keep the kids engaged in the classroom and build those relationships is a little quote that I always keep in mind as I'm lesson planning. And that quote is student choice and student voice. Allowing the students to feel comfortable to share their choices when they're answering questions, whether you got multiple choice up on the board, whether you have a math problem or whatever, they are able to share their choice, share their answers without feeling like they're going to be judged or criticized by the teacher and even the students around them. That's another responsibility of yours, is making sure that person feels safe in your classroom. and having a voice. They can share that answer out loud. They can answer that question of the day, or the question about the history problem or the math problem or whatever it is. They feel safe that they can make those choices and voice their opinions without the fear of being criticized. That is all up to you, making sure that is available, keeping them engaged, because when a student feels like they can contribute to the learning experience, they're going to keep getting involved with the lessons. A lot of my lessons have a lot of engaging elements to them. I do lots of activities, lots of hands-on learning. I don't just sit in front of the class and just lecture all day. I don't just sit at a chair and just talk, go through a couple slides, and then be done. I like to have some kind of experiment in psychology, or some kind of crazy social experiment, my sociology classes or history classes, math classes, English classes, whatever I'm teaching, whatever the other teachers are teaching, make sure it is engaging. Because if you don't have that engagement, the kids are just going to sit there and they're not going to learn. Have an activity, have a game. Throw them off a little bit. They think they're going to just have a lecture today. Have a really fun, engaging activity. Use Google, look up those resources. Teachers pay teachers. There's all kinds of stuff all over the internet. Look up stuff to keep the kids engaged. In my opinion, you cannot really have a truly successful classroom without building relationships with your students. If you come in thinking that you can just throw a bunch of material at them and expect them to learn it and then walk out, clock out for the day, the students aren't going to retain any of that information. Obviously, no teacher is perfect. Nobody is perfect in this profession. But if you try to take some of these tips and apply them to your classroom, you should be able to see an increase in your student engagement and ultimately in those relationships that you're going to be building with your students. Always be consistent. Keep trying to connect with those students, because the more you show that you care, the more that you show that you're interested in their educational journey, the more success you're going to see in your classroom. If you have any questions about building relationships with your students, or even just classroom engagement in general, feel free to drop a comment down below. Don't forget to like and subscribe, and I hope to see you soon.